Alright, so I'm going to take a break from the X-Men for a little bit, and I wanted to talk about a movie that's just a lot of fun. Jason and the Argonauts. Now, Jason and the Argonauts came out in 1963 and is a classic Ray Harryhausen movie. Now, if you don't know who Ray Harryhausen is, well, let me be the one to introduce you, because Ray Harryhausen was an incredibly influential filmmaker. He wasn't a director, he wasn't a producer, but he was the head of a very specific type of special effect, and it's stop motion. He popularized stop motion creature effects in the 50s and 60s and really did achieve an effect that made the unfilmable filmable. He was an assistant to Willis O'Brien, who brought the original King Kong to life, and after really taking the lead on Mighty Joe Young, he branched out and he did all kinds of creature movies. He did The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, he did some Sinbad movies, he did Clash of the Titans, and he did Jason and the Argonauts. And we're talking about Jason and the Argonauts today because this really is one of my favorite Ray Harryhausen movies. Now, is it technically the best or the most ambitious of all of his films? No, there are some serious flaws, and we'll talk about those. But this movie just has such a sense of mythology to it, of adventure to it, this kind of old school fantasy, Greek mythology filmmaking that we just don't see that much anymore today. This was a very different era where you'd have a movie where you got this colorful cast of characters, they hop on a boat, go from place to place, run into adventures, meet wild and wacky creatures at each island, and, you know, ultimately achieve a quest. And this movie is the perfect template for that. You have Jason, who through a pretty convoluted first act needs to go on this quest to retrieve the golden fleece so that he can take his rightful place on the throne. And there's actually a lot of political intrigue in this first section of the movie. There's not a lot of special effects, at least not a lot of Ray Harryhausen special effects. So right away you're like, okay, this is more of a character drama for Jason and the throne of Thessaly and all this political stuff that's going on. And then we go on the voyage. We go on the Argo, which is this ship, and he gets all the best fighters and sailors from across Greece. You have Hercules, who's one of them, and he's actually kind of a minor character. I feel like in any other Greek mythology story, they would have Hercules be a pretty major character, but here, he's just one of the crew, and he does have his own little B-plot, and he does wear this lion skin, which I only assume is the Nemean lion. He's not really in a lot of the movie. He's just kind of a supporting character, and I do like the kind of playful and arrogant characterization that they have for Hercules here. I feel like that's a lot more true to the classic Greek mythology take and not the superhero take that was really popular in the 70s, 80s, and even today. And while Jason is a pretty interesting protagonist and you like him, he's charming, he's charismatic, and he's all the things you'd want in a leading man, he's not really the star of the show here. The star of the show, or I should say stars of the show here, are the Ray Harryhausen creature effects. Now, Ray Harryhausen creature effects, this stop motion style, is not for everybody. There was a time when I couldn't stand his movies because I just thought they looked so cheesy and fake. And now that we live in a post-CGI revolution world, I go back to these movies and I just look at the craft and the meticulous planning that they had to undergo in order to create these effects, and I just appreciate them so much more because of that. And while they don't always look the most convincing, they do feel tactile and tangible in a way that a lot of CGI effects just kind of feel floaty and not really there. Here, you might not believe the scale or the compositing of these things, but you do believe that they were actually filmed in camera, that these were real maquettes, real props that they manipulated in order to create this stop motion effect. And honestly, for the most part in this movie, they look pretty good. Now, if you were to look at the rest of Ray Harryhausen's filmography, you'll probably find cleaner examples of stop motion used than the ones in this movie. But with this one, there is a good deal of different effects. When you start seeing them, they don't really stop until the very end of the movie. But I will say, as a negative, there is a lot of this movie that does not have the Ray Harryhausen special effects. So if you're not taken in by the story of Jason and his plight and his quest, you're going to be kind of bored through the first act or maybe even first half of this movie. There is a lot of buildup and setup in this movie before we get to all the crazy creature effects. And if I'm being honest, that is something that the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad did a lot better, and even Clash of the Titans. Those movies started off showing you the monsters pretty much right out of the get-go, but this movie makes you wait for it. There's a real sense of dread and anticipation going to these islands, coming across these monsters. And the first monster we come across is Talos. And Talos is this 100-foot bronze sculpture that came to life. He's this titan, and he's ultimately the Colossus of Rhodes. If you've ever seen the ancient Greek Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the world, he's this big statue with 1 foot on one bank and another foot on the other bank, and there's this very narrow stretch of water in between his legs. And what's really cool, and I know Harryhausen did this on purpose, is there's a moment when they're trying to escape on their boat and Talos stands like the Colossus of Rhodes and picks up the ship and just wrecks it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with Talos. Not only is he a great cinematic representation of the Colossus, but he's also just a really cool effect in general because he is a statue, and the sound design when he moves, that grinding of metal, it all adds to a much more convincing effect than some of the other more flashy stop motion effects that we get later in this movie. And ultimately that's because of the nature of Talos. Talos is a statue. He's supposed to move kind of jerky and stiff, and he's not the most agile, and that actually really works with the stop motion medium. Talos is this puppet, and stop motion, it can look kind of stiff and janky at times. And that actually works to Harryhausen's advantage here. Now, after they defeat Talos, they go to this other island where they meet this blind prophet, Phineas, and he's being tormented by the Harpies. And the Harpies are a pretty cool effect because they're aerial. They're not land-based. They're up in the sky. They're on these ruins of this temple. And every time Phineas gets a banquet, and right before he starts to eat, the Harpies come down and steal all his food, and he only gets the scraps. And the design on the Harpies are pretty cool because they're these female bat-like demon things. And while they're not necessarily the bird-like Harpies from Greek mythology, they're still pretty memorable. And that's the thing about all of Harryhausen's effects. He may take some creative liberties, but the creative liberties he takes always add to the creature design rather than detract from it or distract from it. Because he could have just done birds, but no, he wanted to do bats with devil horns and hooked feet, and all the intricacies of this character design really come across on screen, even though they don't get a lot of screen time, because again, time is money, and when you're doing with special effects, the longer the sequence, the more money. It's a pretty short sequence, but you'll definitely remember these harpy designs for a long time. And after that, the next big action set piece, the next big creature effect isn't even stop motion. And there's been some debate as to whether or not this was a cost-cutting measure because, you know, stop motion takes a lot of time and money. It's a very painstaking process. And while Jason and the Argonauts are going through the clashing rocks, it's this trench where you have these rock slides just constantly happening, trying to destroy your ship. Jason takes this amulet of Triton and he throws it into the sea. And then all of a sudden, King Triton, the Mer King, he pops up. He's also humongous. He's a giant, and he holds the rocks back, and he's got his fishtail flapping in the waves. He's just this huge dude, doesn't really say much, very imposing look. He looks like a classic Greek god brought to life. He's a dude in a costume that they just scaled up and used very high-speed film to shoot him, so everything he did was like in slow motion and very exaggerated and very meticulous. Because really, if he moved at regular speed, he would have just looked and acted like a normal dude in a fish costume. So by filming him at high speed, it just added that sense of weight to the character. And honestly, this is probably the best way they could have done it at the time, because stop motion is notoriously horrible with water. Water will just mess up a stop motion production because it's so unpredictable and there's all these little droplets and it's constantly moving. So it was really just a better option to go with a man in a suit than to deal with all the stop motion. But now we've done it. We got there. We got to the Golden Fleece, and when they get there, they see the Golden Fleece. And watching this movie again, the way they shoot and make the Golden Fleece look gold with, I don't even know what kind of optical effects that they did on this Golden Fleece, but it looks so enticing, so magical, that you just can't look away from it. That it's just there sitting on a tree, and Jason and company go up to it, but then all of a sudden they're greeted by the Hydra, and the Hydra is the real showstopper monster from this movie. It's got 7 heads and 2 tails, so you can imagine that was very difficult to animate, and it looks really cool. Even though it is stop motion, it looks a little cheesy with all the jerkiness of stop motion. It's still just a really intense fight that Jason has with this thing. And while they don't do as many things with the multi-headed design, and even in Greek mythology where you cut off 1 head and then 2 more take its place, they don't really do anything with that, mostly because if they just kept multiplying heads, that's even more work for Harryhausen, and it already took long enough to make this movie, so I don't think they wanted to add even more to his plate. But for what they gave us, it is a pretty exciting and intense battle. Even though there's clearly some moments where he's swinging at nothing, more often than not, they do sync up the snapping jaws with every sword strike that he throws. So it looks like an actual battle that he's defending himself from all these different heads coming at him. And again, it's kind of brief. It doesn't last that long. Jason does stab him in the chest with the sword. The Hydra goes down, and that's the end. They grab the golden fleece. They get the heck out of there. But then the king of the island that I can't remember the name of, he's upset that they took the golden fleece, and after burning the Hydra's corpse, which in itself is kind of a cool effect, that you actually see this Hydra puppet turn into a skeleton before your very eyes. That's actually another really cool element, a cool design that didn't have to be in the movie, but they went the extra mile. They put that in there just for the fun of it. And now that the Hydra is burned to a skeleton, they take the teeth of the Hydra, and that gives us our next monster, which is the big finale to the movie. And even though the Hydra is clearly the showstopper monster, it's the one that's got the most out there and unique design. It's the one on the poster. It's the one that everyone remembers from this movie. That's not even the most impressive effect in this whole movie. The children of the Hydra's teeth are the most impressive effect in this movie. And I have no idea how they were able to pull this off as well as they did, because this end fight is so bold and ambitious that I didn't even think Ray Harryhausen would be able to pull it off. But he did. And this is what happens. So the bad guy, he sprinkles the Hydra's teeth on the ground, and up springs 7 skeleton warriors. Now, don't ask me how Hydra's teeth springs up skeleton warriors with shields and swords. I don't know, that's just part of the fantasy of it. You say the magic words and skeletons spring up. And the skeleton army attacks what's left of Jason and his crew. And so they have this really intricate fight with multiple humans and multiple skeletons going at each other. And watching again, I'm pretty sure that this was the inspiration for the skeleton crew on the pirate ship in Curse of the Black Pearl. I do see a lot of parallels between how they had to choreograph against nothing in this movie and how when they were making Pirates of the Caribbean, they were also choreographing against nothing. Now, they did have stand-ins, but they had to actually do it against nothing to get the CGI skeletons in that movie. And here, it's kind of the same process on the day of shooting. You can rehearse with a double for the skeleton all day and all night, but when it's time to film and you're just swinging a sword against nothing, you got to make sure that those sword strokes are exact, so they actually line up with the finished animation of the skeletons. And I'm happy to say that the animation lines up beautifully. You might not be able to believe that these skeletons are moving on their own because of the jankiness inherent in stop motion animation, but you will believe that these skeletons moving through some divine power are actually fighting these people. It looks surprisingly realistic. Again, for the time, you kind of have to suspend your disbelief a little bit with this movie, but given that, it does look really impressive. And this is a pretty long sequence too. They do not cut corners in here. There's moments where there's multiple skeletons against a single human, multiple humans with multiple skeletons. It's just this frenzy of action that just does not let up. And some of you Harryhausen fans may say, oh, well, it's actually not that impressive because Harryhausen already tested this idea in The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad with this skeleton warrior that fought Sinbad at the end of that movie. And yeah, that is a really good practice, and it also looks great in that movie, so he did get that down with the choreography and everything, but that's still just one man against one skeleton. This is 7 skeletons against multiple humans, and it's just all going down at the same time. And when you scale something like that, there's so many more things to keep track of, and each skeleton has a little bit of its own personality and a little bit of its own design, so it's not like you could just copy and paste these skeletons. This was all done by hand by the man himself, Ray Harryhausen, and I just love this movie for that. Not only for the impressive animation with the skeletons, but also throughout the whole movie, or at least through the last 2 acts of this movie, when we actually get some really cool monster effects and good character designs. Again, Talos, the Harpies, the Hydra, the Golden Fleece, all these effects just look so good in this movie, and it has a story that can actually showcase all these creative ideas. Now, Harryhausen has done other movies with a similar formula, like I said, the Sinbad movies, Clash of the Titans. There's a bunch of them out there where he just showcases all of his great monster designs. And I highly suggest watching those two. They're all a lot of fun if you know what you're getting into. But I feel like this movie has the right amount of balance of exciting monster action and great character design with a great story that's very rooted in Greek mythology. Jason and the Argonauts, the Golden Fleece, all this stuff has a real tangible root in the mythology that it's depicting and doesn't take too many liberties with the source material. There are liberties, to be sure, and if I knew the actual story a lot better, I could probably pick those out a lot more. But from what I can tell from my vague familiarity with the story, there's a lot that they actually get right about Greek mythology in here. On top of that, this is a type of movie that we really don't see anymore. We don't really see movies today where the big selling point is come look at all the wild and unexpected things that our heroes are going to come across as they go from island to island. You won't believe the next thing that pops up. And watching these movies again, especially Jason and Argonauts, just brings me back to that time when movies were truly magical, where you didn't know what you were going to see next, when anything could happen. It was only limited to Harryhausen's creativity and the budget he was given. Now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Jason and the Argonauts? And what's your favorite Ray Harryhausen movie? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.